This happened to me in 2020, right when the world was spiraling into chaos because of COVID. Everyone was stuck at home, isolated and uncertain. But for me, it was the perfect excuse to disappear. I was an avid backpacker, a lover of the outdoors, so I decided to escape it all, to travel to different national parks and camp in the most remote places. One of those places was a secluded creek in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. But before I tell you what happened out there, you need to know something. My life wasn't exactly normal at the time. Something I did back in 2019. Let's just say it ruined my reputation. I lost my job, my apartment, and even had to change my phone number. People were angry. They had lost money because of me. I thought it was over, that they'd forget about me. But that's when the texts started. Random numbers, threatening messages. It seemed like someone was out to make me pay. I didn't know if it was one person or a group, but it didn't stop. I moved on, trying to ignore it. And eventually, it seemed to die down, but it didn't. Not really. That's when I drove to the Rocky Mountains, 3 hours of driving to a remote trail where no one would find me. Just me, the wilderness, and some peace of mind, or so I thought. The trail was quiet. A thick layer of snow blanketed everything, making that eerie crunching sound with each step. No one else was around. It was peaceful, too peaceful. I made it to the creek and set up camp. The fire crackled as I cooked some sausages, trying to relax with a good book. But the phone buzzed, a new message, an unknown number. My heart skipped. Could it be? I pulled the phone out, shaking. The message read, "How's your camping going, buddy?" I stared at it, confused. Who the hell was this? But the second text came in, almost instantly. "It's beautiful out here." I'm sorry, beautiful out here. At that moment, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just a random message. They were acting like they were right there with me. I was high, my anxiety already through the roof. My thoughts raced. Was this someone from my past? Someone who had been harassing me? But how would they know I was here, in the middle of nowhere? Did you catch that? How did they know you were camping? Could it be a prank? Or was it something more sinister? Before I could even process, I typed, "Who is this?" and waited. But the next text was even worse. "I see why you came up here." My blood ran cold. They knew where I was, and how. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just a sick joke. But then the footsteps outside my tent broke the silence. It was unmistakable, the crunch of boots in snow, and they were getting closer. I froze. I could hear the footsteps stopping just outside my tent. A few feet away. 6 feet, maybe 5. Then a flash of light. It was brief, but it looked like someone had shined a flashlight at my tent, or worse, taken a picture. I quickly grabbed my gun, my only comfort right now. I had it for protection, but had I ever really imagined using it? Number. Not until now. My phone buzzed again, another picture of my tent. "Have a good night's sleep," the message said, and that's when something snapped inside me. A rush of adrenaline surged through me as the paranoia completely overtook my high. I unzipped the tent and fired 2 shots into the air. I heard the footsteps scrambling, running through the snow as fast as they could. But here's the thing, I still didn't feel safe. I knew they were out there, hiding in the darkness, watching me. I screamed into the night, hoping to scare them off. And for a while, there was nothing. No more footsteps, no more texts. But what if they never left? That night I barely slept. I couldn't. Every creak, every rustle in the snow had me on edge. But when the morning sun finally broke through, I felt a wave of relief. Whoever was stalking me, they were gone, and thankfully, I never heard from them again. Now, 5 years later, the texts have stopped. But I can't help but wonder, if I hadn't had that gun, would the story have ended differently? Would I still be here, telling you this? Think about it. What would you have done in that situation? Would you have been able to defend yourself? Or would you have become another horror story? Remember, Not all monsters are what you expect. Some of them, they're closer than you think, watching, waiting. Every year, my family had a tradition, one that should have been fun. We'd go up to northern Michigan in October for a weekend of family bonding. My Uncle Jim had this sprawling 4-acre property out there, and his house could fit a crowd, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and room for all of us. The adults would stay in one part of the house, and the kids, well, we'd be in the other rooms, all crammed together, with my brother and sister in one room, and my cousins in the next. It was chaotic, but in the good way, or at least, it should have been. But there's something you need to understand. My uncle, he was a big-time hunter, had all the gear, and the land around his house, it was surrounded by dense forest. He marked the trees with red paint to show where his property ended. Beyond that, just woods. No one lived there. It was quiet, and maybe too quiet. One night, while our dads were drinking and talking about hunting, us boys, me, my brother Adam, and my cousins, Jake and Joe, came up with an idea. We wanted to go camping. Now I want you to picture this. 4 young boys, ages 9 to 13, standing in the woods, thinking we were invincible. Our dads, already half drunk, thought it was hilarious. Our moms, on the other hand, were less thrilled. But when they didn't directly say no, our dads packed us up, handed us a tent, and off we went. We went deeper into the woods than we ever should have. The trees loomed overhead, blocking out most of the light, but my Uncle Jim had this spot marked out. This small clearing in the woods he called Deer Beds, perfect for camping, he said. So we set up the tent. Daylight was on our side, and with some help from our dads, we managed to get the tent up. But then the night came, and that's when everything changed. Our dads walked us back to the campsite, joking and laughing. They handed us flashlights, extra blankets, and told us to stay close. Then they left us, out there, alone. We didn't realize how far we actually were from the house. The only light came from our little flashlights. We were deep enough in the woods that not even the house's porch lights could reach us. At first, everything was normal. We played Uno, laughed and joked about what we'd do when we got older. But then, something shifted. We heard it, a scream. At first, we all froze. It sounded like a woman, high-pitched, desperate. It echoed through the woods. My cousin Joe went pale, almost in tears. I tried to calm everyone down, thinking maybe it was just a fox. I'd heard their screams before, but then it happened again, and this time it was louder and closer. I'm curious, what would you do if you heard that scream? Would you try to go back to the house, or would you hide in the tent, praying it's just your imagination? We decided to stay put. At least that's what we told ourselves. But we turned off our flashlights and huddled in the dark. The silence that followed, it wasn't normal. The kind of silence where every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves felt amplified. Then we heard it. Footsteps, fast, crunching leaves, approaching, and then the scream. But this time it wasn't just distant. It was right outside our tent, and then the tent started shaking violently. Like something, or someone, was outside, clawing at it. We screamed. Jake and Joe were hysterical. Me and Adam were in full panic mode. I unzipped the tent and told everyone to run. We grabbed our flashlights and bolted. Every step, every crunch of snow behind us made my heart race. It was that life or death feeling. We ran as fast as we could, not daring to look back. And when we finally burst onto the property, screaming, our family was already outside. They were waiting, alarmed by the chaos. We told them everything, the screams, the tent shaking. But there was something that hit me as I looked around. Our cousins, Jamie, Christina, and my sister, they weren't there. I called out to my dad and uncle, accusing them of sending the girls to prank us, but they showed us that the girls were already in bed. That's when we all realized the terrifying truth. Someone or something had been out there, and they weren't trying to scare us. They were hunting us. Our dads took rifles and went back into the woods, but when they came back hours later, they'd found nothing, no tracks, no evidence. We never went back to those woods after that night, never camped out there again. And trust me, we didn't even play outside after dark anymore. Think about that. If you were out there alone in the woods, would you have made it back? What was out there? I guess we'll never know. What I'm about to tell you still leaves me questioning what's real and what's not. This happened to my dad and me 2 years ago. And even now, when I think about it, I get chill. I know how it sounds if I were you. I probably wouldn't believe it either, but I swear to you, every word is true. 2 years ago, my dad and I decided to go camping. A typical father-son trip to get away from the noise of life. We went to a spot deep in the country, a beautiful place with hiking trails, zip lines, and a bit of touristy charm. There was even a deep history tied to Native American lands. Our first night was perfect families, scattered around other campsites, campfires glowing in the distance, kids laughing. It was the kind of peaceful night you imagine when you think of camping. We roasted hot dogs, made s'mores, cracked open a couple beers, and made small talk with the people nearby. But it was the second night that things started to change. The staff told us that we were the only ones in the park. No one else had booked a site. At first, we were excited a whole campground to ourselves. Peaceful, right? But as the sun started to set, something shifted in the air. We spent the day hiking, fishing, taking it easy. At one point, we even sat by the river listening to a creepy podcast for laughs, trying to lean into the spooky atmosphere. But as the sun dipped lower, we started feeling it, that unease. Have you ever been somewhere and just felt something was wrong, even though everything looked fine? That's how it was. The woods felt endless, the air heavy. There was this strange tint to the sky, like twilight didn't want to leave. My dad turned to me and said, "Doesn't this feel off? Like we're in some kind of dream?" I couldn't explain it, but I felt it too. The forest stretched in all directions, like it was closing in on us. My chest tightened. I kept looking over my shoulder like something was following us. We didn't say much after that. We just walked back to camp, both of us glancing nervously at the trees. And when we finally got to our campsite, we tried to shake it off. We stayed close to the fire, trying to keep things normal, roasting marshmallows, playing music, even smoked a little weed to calm ourselves down, trying to distract from the weird feeling in the air. But it only got worse when the sun dipped completely below the trees. By now we couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. It came out of nowhere, a loud, jarring bang from the direction of the river. It echoed through the woods like a tree had fallen. We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them toward the sound, but there was nothing, no movement, no eyes. Bigfoot, we joked nervously, trying to laugh it off, but we didn't really believe it. Minutes passed, and then it came again. Bang. Louder this time, farther off, but the same sound heavy, like something big crashing through the trees. We shone our lights again, but the darkness swallowed the beams. All we saw were the trees around us, and the creeping, terrible feeling that we weren't alone. Then came the third bang. That's when the fear hit. Whatever was out there was circling us. I turned to my dad, and we both knew this wasn't just a random animal. Something was moving toward us. And then the fourth bang, about 20 yards away, maybe less. It shook the ground beneath us. At that moment, the weed buzz was completely gone. The adrenaline kicked in. My dad's eyes went wide. "Get in the tent," he whispered. We scrambled. We threw the last of the firewood onto the fire, hoping the flames would keep whatever it was away, but we weren't sure. We grabbed what we could and dove into the tent. I threw myself to the ground, flat on my stomach. My dad followed, a little slower, and just as he was about to get in, the loudest bang of all came. It felt like the ground shook beneath us. I turned to my dad, eyes wide. His face was pale. He froze, staring into the darkness outside the tent. "What is it?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he muttered, "It's standing there." "What's standing there?" I asked, my voice trembling. I don't know," he said, his voice shaking. "It's like a wall of darkness." I barely breathed, clutching the sleeping bag, trying to stay as still as possible. Then we heard something else, a hum. It wasn't just sound, it vibrated in the air, making my chest tighten. Have you ever felt like something was hunting you? That's how it felt. My dad whispered, "Do you hear that?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded. And then came the worst sound of all. It was this guttural, alien-like sound. I don't know how else to explain it. It sounded wrong, like something from another world. We stayed frozen in the tent, too scared to move, too terrified to even breathe. I had a small mesh window next to me, but I refused to look through it. I was terrified of what I might see. Then, in the middle of all that fear, Wuba